Welcome, everyone. Before we actually begin, I guess this is the beginning. I just want to thank Melvin, as usual, for bringing the breakfast food, and everyone is welcome to participate in that. And I want to thank Dolores for her work in actually bringing together this program. So welcome to the 2019-2020 version of the UUSF Forum, Morning Forum. My name is Bruce. I'm the coordinator for the Forum Planning Committee for this year. So today we're very fortunate to have, and I want to emphasize very fortunate, to have Professor Bill Hing from USF to speak. Professor Hing is a longtime advocate for immigrant rights and justice, someone who has a deep knowledge, especially the history and practice of law related to immigrants and immigration. His work and activities are extremely relevant to what is going on today, literally today, as one of the most serious concerns we face are the brutal conditions imposed on tens of thousands of immigrants and refugees, those seeking refuge from murderous conditions in their home countries, yet are treated as criminals and invaders by this government. They often end up in what we used to call detention centers, but are more correctly denounced as concentration camps. Now I want to bring up Professor Bill Hing. Following his presentation, there'll be a period of questions and answers. So let's welcome Professor Hing.
Thank you, Dolores, for the invitation. I met Bruce, it turns out, back in 2014, and so I want to tip my hat off to him for his, that's not that long ago, but I understand that he's had a long-term interest in the similar kinds of things that I'm interested in. We met when there was a surge of what are labeled unaccompanied minors that was hitting the headlines in 2014, that summer. And believe me, minors were traveling to the border long before 2014, but that year there were over 60,000 unaccompanied minors, primarily from what's called the Northern Triangle of Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, and a fair number of Mexican unaccompanied minors as well. And the Obama administration, and what didn't hit the headlines was that there were also over 60,000 women that were coming with children. So there was way over 100,000 folks in 2014 coming at that time. And to the disappointment of many of us in the immigrant rights community, the Obama administration knuckled under to political pressure and actually opened detention centers. First in Artesia, New Mexico. Then, after a lot of complaints about the conditions there, they opened two that are continuing in Karnes, Texas, and Dilley, Texas. And Mr. Trump has pointed to those actions of Obama as setting the precedent for what he's doing today, which of course is far worse. We're trying to figure out what we can do to close these things down. But I'm going to bore you for a minute with some of the legal reasons. I have this outline that I think is on your tape sheet of how we got here. So Peter Shea and Carlos Holguin, who work for the Center on Constitutional Rights in Los Angeles, they're the attorneys, the initial attorneys who represented a young girl named Jenny Flores way back in the 1980s, who was detained when she came to the United States, trying to get reunified with her parents. And they thought this was insane. The immigration, back then it was the Immigration and Naturalization Service, they shouldn't be able to detain children. This is crazy. So they brought a lawsuit on her behalf, a class action on behalf of children who were being detained by INS, arguing that this is unjust, violation of due process, violation of the rights of children. They cited international law. And that case went all the way up to the Supreme Court in a case called Reno versus Flores. And over 25 years ago, the Supreme Court said, yes, they can detain children, that that's not a violation of any laws, any part of the Constitution, and besides that, we really don't pay attention to international law, which is, we don't. I mean, pick any area of law, climate, anything. The United States pretty much is courts, thumbs their noses at international law, and so, but I digress. And so the Supreme Court held we can detain, INS can detain children, but under what conditions we'll let the lower, we're going to send this case back to the lower court to determine under what conditions the children can be detained. And so it got sent back down to the federal district court in Los Angeles where the case was filed. And ultimately, after years of negotiation, there was a settlement reached between Peter and Carlos and the United States government. And at that time, it was with the Clinton administration. And that led to what is known as the Flores Settlement Agreement. And you from time to time, you still hear reference to the Flores Agreement, the Flores Conditions, and that's what they're talking about. You can Google that, you'll actually see all the conditions under which children can be detained, and it's that they're supposed to be held only in a facility that is least restrictive setting, that it's got to be a license, it's got to be a facility that's licensed by the state in terms of being able to care for children. There's got to be adequate health care, it's got to be safe and sanitary. Safe and sanitary, that phrase, 2 months ago, now in the middle of summer, that hit the headlines because the government attorney was saying that providing toothbrushes and something else, was it showers? But that wasn't part of safe and sanitary. We didn't need to provide that. The Court of Appeals slammed the government attorney on that later. But those are the conditions, and that's what we've lived with since 1997. Those conditions, and one other big, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, one other big change was what's called the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008 that George W. Bush signed, and it had to do with more protections for children because, again, under the Flores Agreement, you're not supposed to be kept for in immigration detention for more than 3 weeks. You're not, if you're a child. But you can, after that, you can be sent to one of these state licensed facilities. And so that can be indefinite. So children today can be kept indefinitely in these facilities that are not operated by the Department of Homeland Security. They're operated by a different department. They're operated by Health and Human Services, which is another department. Health and Human Services has a division called the Office of Refugee Resettlement that most of us are familiar with in terms of resettlement of Southeast Asian refugees, resettlement of Middle Eastern refugees. Well, they're also responsible for, believe it or not, the care and detention of unaccompanied minors. And they subcontract that responsibility out to private companies, not the prison companies like CoreCivic and Geo Group, but other private companies. The biggest one is Southwest Keys. And all of this is billion-dollar industry. Okay, so once they cannot be held for more than 20 days by DHS, but after that, they can be held indefinitely by ORR. They're supposed to be looking for sponsors. And so most of them do get out, okay? But we've represented some kids that didn't get out for more than a year because of a foster family or a sponsor couldn't be identified. The reason I point out the TVPRA is because George Bush signed a provision that the Border Patrol can't. So in DHS, there is ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and there's also Border Patrol. There's also something else that's supposed to be more friendly with Citizenship and Immigration Services. That's all under DHS. The Border Patrol under the TVPRA is not supposed to hold anyone for more than 72 hours. The Border Patrol is the one that arrests people at the border, okay? And so they're not supposed to hold them for more than 72 hours. They're supposed to at least turn them over to ICE, and then ICE can't hold them for more than 3 weeks, and then they're supposed to then be turned over to ORR. If your head is spinning, believe me, it is. The point I want to get across is that detention, unaccompanied minors, much less families, are detained. And I guess I should mention that if you're an adult, either coming by yourself or with your spouse, or coming with a child that's not your child, that is your niece or nephew or younger sibling, you will be automatically separated from that child if you're coming with your niece or nephew. Last summer, the big uproar was not about that issue. The issue last summer was about separating children from their parents. But that was supposed to stop, even though the footnote is that 900 continue to be separate. But when it's not your child, it's your cousin, your niece, your nephew, you will automatically be separated from that child. The reason I'm pointing that out is those adults, more than likely, if they didn't try to come in orderly, and most of the people waiting at the border that we read about, they're actually trying to come in orderly. They're trying to get in line and present themselves at the port of entry. But if you don't get in line, if you actually try to cross without inspection, and you're an adult, and it's not your child you're with, you will be criminally prosecuted for attempting to enter without inspection. Okay, and so it is a federal misdemeanor to try to enter without inspection. And it's come up in the debate, the first Democratic debate. Julian Castro was making a big deal out of that and challenging Beto O'Rourke, and so Julian Castro wants to get rid of that provision. So some of you may have heard of something called Operation Streamline, and that's what happens to adults. They get subject to Operation Streamline, which is the federal prosecution for entry without inspection or attempt. 2 weeks ago, I should start going, I want to confess something, I should probably start going to church more, okay? But 2 weeks ago, I went to church at Southside Presbyterian Church in Tucson, which is where the sanctuary movement started in the 1980s. And I was there in Tucson because a couple days before that was Labor Day weekend, a group of us from UUSF actually went with Father Fitzgerald to volunteer across the border on the Mexico side of Nogales, Sonora, at a place called Kino Border Initiative to serve meals and that kind of stuff. And I'll probably go back in the spring with the immigration clinic to provide legal assistance. But I'm pointing that out because on one of the days that we were there, we went to witness Operation Streamline in the federal court, which is the federal prosecution of 65 people that basically Syrian in groups of 10 basically are pretty much strong-armed into pleading guilty to this misdemeanor. So that's what happens to the adults. Most of them don't have to go to jail much longer than the time they've been in custody. But the problem with Operation Streamline is once that's on your record, the next time you come, it's a felony. And then you're going to go to jail. if you're convicted of felony. And so, all right. So, but if you're with your child, they will, if they have capacity, they'll send you to one of the family detention centers. And the biggest ones that continue to be the two in Texas, Dilley and Carnes. And they hold up to a couple thousand people a day, and I've gone there. So there are children there, because it's usually mothers with children or fathers with their children. There's another one for fathers in Pennsylvania, Berks County, Pennsylvania. And I've been on the inspection teams at those family centers as well, and I would challenge you to not do. I would challenge you that you would not be able to be any different from me when you witness this. Once you're in those detention rooms and you either are with children that are housed alone or with the mothers and their children, you'll cry. It's sad. I have two grandchildren, a 3.5-year-old and a 10-month-old granddaughters, and when I first saw that, you can't help but think of other healthy children, fortunate children that you know who are able to laugh and play. The one word that I'll say to you that kind of represents all the children that I've seen in detention, that kind of captures it and scares the heck out of you, is lethargy. No energy, no bright smiles, no playfulness. It's sad. Over the years, both Obama and Trump have tried to challenge the application of Flores to the family detention centers, arguing, Flores was intended for only unaccompanied children. Flores shouldn't apply to custody where it's a parent and a child. And both times that argument has been rejected by the federal judge and the Court of Appeals here in this part of the country, the Ninth Circuit. So far, that applies even to family situations. But people keep on asking, why can't this just be cleaned up? Why can't, and that's why I'm so grateful for what you all are trying to do, which is just close these things. They just drag their feet, the government just drags its feet. The judge gets mad at them. We go and we do our inspections. We then report. And then what happens? Well, they change. We recommend that 6 things need to be done. Then they change 2 of the 6 things. Then we have to go back and complain about the other 3 things. Then what happens? Then they change 1 of the things. Then there's a new thing that they were doing wrong. And so it just goes on and on and on. And it goes on. It's gone on for years. And when I went to Clint, Texas in the middle of June, a group had gone the week before, a group of volunteers and the inspection team had gone before in a place called, it's more near McAllen, Texas. And they had walked into a room where a young teenage mom had by herself given birth to her baby, and the guards were not even aware of it. And it was the inspection team that saw this poor child wrapped in dirty linen, and fortunately they rushed them to the emergency room and everything was okay. We thought that was going to be the worst, but apparently that wasn't the worst, because there were some people who were on both teams said that was bad, but the worst was where we went to Clint, because at that other facility people weren't held, the children weren't held for more than 7 days. But what we found in Clint was that children were being held far in violation of the 72-hour Border Patrol limitation. And Some of you have read my account of Clint, and just the two things that I'll mention, two examples that I'll mention was two boys, ages 11 and 4, because of abandonment of one parent and another parent then came to the United States. It was the grandparents that cared for them. And the 11-year-old actually had taken care of his 4-year-old brothers since the age of 9 months with the grandparents. And when I walked into that room to interview those two kids, they were dirty, just like all the other little kids. They were expected to shower in front of teenagers and that kind of stuff. You're not going to do that. Their clothes were dirty. They smelled, and the 4-year-old wasn't talking, and he didn't look right to me. And I said to his brother, does your brother talk? And he said, oh yeah, he talks. He really does talk. He's just shy. And then I was there for maybe 15 minutes, and he still hadn't talked as I was interviewing the older brother. And finally, there was a pediatrician with us from Stanford on that inspection team. So I went to get her because I was worried about this 4-year-old. And she was tons smarter than I am. And she came in with bubbles, and she started blowing bubbles, and that 4-year-old just completely brightened up and started jabbering and that kind of thing. But he was incomprehensible because he actually did have a learning disability. And while his older brother could understand him, it was very difficult for us to understand him because of the learning disability. And so we both wrote affidavits on behalf of those two boys to make sure that they would never get separated, because that 4-year-old would not be able to survive without his older brother. That, and then the other experience is that I did interview 3 young teenage moms, because you can't be in there unless you're under 18, who were nursing, and they didn't know until we got there that they could have requested formula. Listen, I'm of the school of thought that breastfeeding is the best, okay? But when your meal is the same as everyone else's, the women were not getting enough nutrition. The morning was an oatmeal mix. That's breakfast. The lunch was ramen, where they put hot water in it, the cup of noodle stuff. The dinner was a zapped frozen burrito, okay? And everybody said the same thing. We challenged the Border Patrol people, is it true that you're just giving these 3 things? Oh, and the drink that they got were those pouch sugary drinks. That's what they were drinking, no milk or anything like that. And so they said, well, yeah, that's all we have, because we know we're not supposed to keep them for more than 72 hours. And so we don't have anything else to feed them. So they were pointing their finger at Office of Refugee Resettlement. They said, OR won't take them because they don't have the capacity. And so what are we going to do? And so it was totally insane. And so I'm going to stop there because this goes on and on and on and on. And I agree with you that really we got to figure out a way of closing these things down.
So what can we do? Because we're willing, we just need you to help us, tell us what we can do for enforcement.
You mean enforcing the immigration laws?
Enforcement for the betterment of refugees, children and adults and families together, because there's no mental health if we don't keep these people together, and their mind is closed to education because they have so many problems.
Well, the answer to your question is the same answer to this question. How do you stop the Trump administration from doing everything that it can to allow people to apply for asylum? The vast majority of folks that are coming are trying to present themselves orderly at the border. And so if we can figure out how to get them to back off, to allow folks to come in to be processed, honestly, Okay, there's 40,000 people right now that are waiting in an orderly fashion. That's not that many people, okay? We can actually allow them to come in, take their name and number down, let them go where they're headed, because everybody knows where they're headed. Most of the kids that I interviewed, they have phone numbers in their pockets of their relatives and where they're going to. It didn't take a brain surgeon to figure that out. And I actually helped them make phone calls with my cell phone. And so one of them ended up in Marin County, and so we're actually representing this 8-year-old and his mother, and it isn't that difficult. Some of them need foster care, but most of them did not need foster care. So we can get them processed in an orderly fashion. Things will calm down, and that's what we have to do, is resist these attempts to stop people from orderly fashion. Now they're making people apply through a third country. Actions, I think, are important. And I don't think it's just changing the presidency, although I think that many Americans don't feel the same way as we do. I hope it's just that. And if that's the problem, that they don't know, then how do we figure a way of making sure more people know?
We got and in all these years, they talk in circles, the Democrats and Republicans, about immigration reform, and it never happens because they want a large force of people without papers and so on. So to what degree do you think a lot of this that's going on now, we know there's a demographic change, there's an aging population in the United States, there's a declining white population, there's a real need for workers. You go out in the fields and the growers are all saying, I need people. To what degree do you think that there is just a double game being played on us, where they use the immigration issue to divide us, to create anger, to whip up white supremacy, when in fact, it's the same old game, bring cheap labor in, but do it in a quiet way?
Unfortunately, politics are such that, including Democrats, they're looking over their shoulders at their constituents. And many of them are in this politics. They're in swing districts, they're not sure they're going to be reelected, they have to be careful what they're saying, and just very few of them stand up and say and do what they want. I mean, Jeff Flake in Arizona.
It's immigration and also racism and white privilege, because that's sort of like unspoken, but it's there, and we all know it. And it seems like the people on the right are doing forecasts about the demographics in this country, which are going to change tremendously in the next 10 years. So that's one thing. But another thing we have to be aware of is we have to sort of get in an activist state, because the next thing that's coming is people coming to our border fleeing climate change in their countries. And most of those countries are from the south. And it's already happening in Europe. And so we're going to be facing another big deluge, probably for different reasons, but we have to prepare ourselves for these things. Thank you so much for coming.
I just want to underline what Dolores just said. The convergence of an ugly, racist, white supremacist, fascist regime in power and growing climate change, denies climate change, and doing everything it possibly can to prevent the catastrophe from coming. Combine that with a mean-spirited attitude towards the very people who are the most victims of climate change is a very nasty combination. So much of what is going on in Central America is directly a response to what this country has done there to undermine the civic community and governments and so on, and their economic system, to plunder these areas of the world, which we're just barely aware of. It's way more than even those of us who have been studying this stuff really understand. But, and I want to thank you all for being here.